And I got a smile on my face because I'm going to play one of the great rock and roll songs of all time with one of the most distinctive voices of all time. Take a listen to Lou Christie. Lou Christie, what a delight it is to have you. Welcome to the Beatles Fab Forum.
Well, thank you. It's my pleasure being here this evening.
That song still jumps out of the radio. I have vivid memories of driving around. I don't know if I could drive yet, but somebody was driving me around. And right. The AM radio, I grew up in New York City, so it's got to be one of the 3 rock and roll radio stations. And that song is blasting through and cutting through. And it is a pleasure to welcome Lou Christie this evening. Now, we're going to get into the Beatles and Lou Christie and a lot of other things, but I've been waiting, 1965, long time, to finally get, to finally, it's Dennis Elsis, and I've been waiting a long time to finally get the story from the man himself. So after Lightning Strikes, yes. There's a wonderful, you know where I'm going with this one. There's a.
Are you talking about the follow-up?
Yeah, so there's a great story. So you tell the story of Rhapsody in the Rain, please.
Oh, well, after Lightning Strikes, which I guess probably last week, it went to #1 on my birthday, by the way. Isn't that bizarre?
That's great.
I wrote the song and then sang the song, and then and then it went to #1 across the country, and then we had to find a follow-up. So I thought, oh boy, okay, let's get going. So Twyla and I wrote a song called "Rhapsody in the Rain." And it was about that great experience that we used to have in the back seat of a car. And I always say when we could fit in the back seat of a car, but they were those great, wonderful, big Dodges and Fords and Chevys and Cadillacs. Those cars where they were just like pieces of art. Wrote the song, and that was about. Making out in the rain. That's why I used that phrase. We were making out in the rain. And in this car, love went much too far. And then I said it was exciting as thunder. And then the windshield wipers seemed to be pulsating out together, 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 together. And they were background girls were singing together. They kept it going, and I'm going, ooh wee, baby, And so it was my orgasmic record.
Way before Donna Summer, way before Love to Love You, Baby.
Way before.
And what was the reaction among
It was banned. It was banned on. We put it out, and it started. The kids. I mean, they just went wild for it. It was just, they made me go and change the lyrics to it because it was a little too suggestive. But I thought the ones that I changed it to, everyone knew what was going on because even Time magazine had written an article and said that I was corrupting the youth of the day, and I was getting phone calls from, and it was getting banned all across America from. PTA meetings. They were saying, they were calling, and priests and nuns were calling and saying, don't play this record. I mean, it was really crazy. But and they made me go in and change the lyrics, and I changed the lyrics. But the kids wanted to buy the original dirty version, I'm afraid. And that's the one that's really probably, if you're a collector, that's the one that cost a lot because I think only 20-some thousand, I think, were released from that, and then the new version came out. But there were places that wouldn't even let me sing it on stage. I was
really?
in Chicago. Wow. Yeah, it was very bizarre. It was very, it was prior to that whole sexual revolution, It was
about a minute before. The next year was the Summer of Love. You might have started the Summer of Love, Lou.
I don't know.
Well, I mean, you mentioned Twyla, and that's Twyla Herbert, who was your co-writer, and like Lennon and McCartney, you were half of a very successful songwriting team, but what was very unusual was that Twyla was about 20 years older than you, was she not?
Yes, she was.
So when it started, you were a teenager, and she's kind of a 35-year-old gypsy woman, sort of.
That's right. I was 15 when that all happened, and the very first song we wrote together was "A Gypsy Cried," and we wrote it in about 15 minutes. It was just unbelievable. I mean, we sat down at that piano and never got up until 30-some years later, But we wrote constantly and laughed and just had a friggin' ball. my whole career, you know, and wrote some very interesting stuff and probably some of my best stuff is in some of these, you know, tapes and drawers and trunks that I have.
Well, it's time to digitize it. It's time to get it out of there.
I know. There's so much. And then what? Put it in the cloud?
That's where we're all ending up these days.
I know.
We're talking to Lou Christie on the Beatles Fab Forum, and I hope this isn't a stretch, but having been part of such a successful songwriting partnership, do you see anything in the Lennon-McCartney partnership that resonates with you, and you go, yeah, I know what it is to have that magic with a partner, and I know what it is when it goes away?
Absolutely. I mean, it's we both studied it, you know. I mean, I was really working a lot, doing concerts around the country, and I was on the Dick Clark Caravan of Stars, and, you know, with people like the Supremes and Gene Pitney, and I was traveling, and every time I'd get off, I'd run back to Pittsburgh, because that's where I was from, to write some more with Twyla. And we would talk on the phone, you know, every day, all the time. Nothing like it is today, of course, you know, because you had to reverse charges.
Right. Making a long-distance call was a big deal.
Oh, my God. Yes, it was. But anyhow, we just said, what in the hell is going on? Because so many of my friends who were, you know, on the Caravan with or did American Bandstand with were disappearing. You know, Frankie Avalon was, Bobby Rydell, Fabian, all the, you know, the teenagers, the Connie Francis's, you know, and Motown was coming up, but the Beatles changed the world. They changed the world.
They changed the world, and I mean, that's really interesting because you were very young. You said, you know, you had your comeback hit after you got out of the Army on your 23rd birthday, but
you got it.
You were initially a kind of a Dick Clark star, and as you say, when the Beatles hit, most of those guys started falling away, and I wonder, did you consciously say, if I'm going to stay in the game, I got to change something, I got to listen to what they're doing, I've got to get the new vocabulary down?
No, I listened to everything they did, but I never tried to make a record to try to sound like someone else or try to cut a record like that. Just never did. Twyla and we just had our own space in whatever it was, that bubble that we were in, and we wrote something always original. It was never trying to sound like another artist. It was never trying to write like another artist, you know, because she had classical backgrounds in her, and I had sort of rock and roll and great pop melodies going through me. So I never really considered myself kind of a rock and roller. I didn't look at myself as that. It was, you know, I liked great melodies, I liked great harmonies, and we picked interesting chord patterns. But boy, did we learn! I mean, we wrote every day, and we were amazed at the writing of McCartney and that. It was just, well, I couldn't believe it. I mean, because they were really some interesting things, and I think. You know, I would say George Martin was, you know, really, really one of the persons that moved that thing forward, because the arrangements were very classical, and you knew that someone knew what they were doing on these instruments and how to play them and how to get the best out of that song, that 3-minute song, you know. But they changed the world. I mean, you know, starting with the hair and everything else that went with it, you know. And
that was an outward sign of all the inward changes that were going on. And, you know, what's interesting is, I think when people look back on rock and roll history or pop music history, we tend, I guess this is just the way our brains store things, but we tend to think that one thing ended, surf music ended, and then folk music came in, and then the Beatles came in, But, you know, everything, what made the 60s great was everything was kind of happening at the same time. And you had the Supremes and the Four Seasons and Johnny Cash and Peter, Paul and Mary and the Beatles and Lou Christie all having hits simultaneously.
Well, yeah, that's true. But, you know, it's so funny because that all started happening, and then AM radio started dying out. You know, it started being taken over by, you know, FM. And I was very aware of it because I thought, you know, it's the transistors, you know, in your ear were one thing, but then all of a sudden, you know, when people started smoking joints and everyone started getting stoned, and then all of a sudden they became LPs, you know, and they would, like, you know, we had the framework of an album was totally different. You know, they were writing longer songs. they were being more self-indulgent musically. You know, they weren't going for the 3-minute record or the 2.5-minute record, or like a Leslie Gore record, which she did. I think Sunshine Lollipops was, I think, 1.5 minutes. It was the shortest pop record that ever happened.
That was packing it in. And of course, you know, the AM/FM moment that I think of when I think of Lou Christie is "I'm Gonna Make You Mine," which was a big hit in '69. But as you say, things were moving away from AM toward FM. And then in '71, you released an album called "Paint America Love," which seemed like kind of you getting in on the post Sgt. Pepper LP FM sensibility.
Well, absolutely. Everyone was like, you know, presenting these albums, and I thought, and I kept trying to signal my record company, because it was like always jumping to another record company because someone else could make more money from that situation, you know. So I always wanted to stay with one company so I could build a category that would last for a long time. So when the FM started, we said, you know, it's not going to be just I for the rest of my life, you know. But we wrote some very interesting things, and I think it's one of my sort of classic albums that we took it as a album instead of where's the hit record, where's the 2-minute record, you know. But it was very hard for Buddha Records, it was Neil Bogart at the time, to understand what we were trying to do, because he was a 45, expert at picking 45 records, you know.
Yeah. And there was
and I'm Gonna Make You Mine, thank God. I found that record, and we recorded that one, and that was in the middle of the whole Vietnam. Everyone was protesting, and there I was with, baby, I'm gonna make you mine. You know, but it worked. It worked all around the world, and it was so big in England, and I ended up spending most of my time in England doing concerts and TV and Top of the Pops and all those things.
And by the time FM radio, and certainly for the first part of the 70s, there was almost a built-in rejection of the artists that had been top 40 smash artists in the 60s.
Absolutely.
They just weren't hip. And though even if you put out a concept album or some of the other artists that did, that's Lou Christie. And it would just sort of be pushed to the wayside. And, you know, I'm sure now, in retrospect, we missed a lot of good music because of that. There was a song, though, that you did in 1973. You covered an old song that goes all the way back to 1930, Beyond the Blue Horizon.
Oh, God, yes, one of the best.
And it shows up in Rain Man so many years later. How does that all come about?
That showed up in, I don't know how many, I think about 5 different movies. We brought the record out, and it was on Creed Taylor's label. I don't know if you remember CTI.
Sure, yeah.
He had a lot of jazz people and things like that, and Benson and all that. But then he started a new label called Three Brothers for us, and brought the record out, and literally, I think the first week, they closed the doors to the company because they had gone belly up or something. They couldn't even, press enough records to have with people to even sell in the store. It was just on. But it got such reviews. It just didn't stop, and it got, reviews that to this day, it's probably the most requested song that I do in concerts, because it ended up in Rain Man. It ended up in, like I say, 5 other movies. It was a theme song for the travel TV show. It was it just went on and just kept growing all by itself. And Cash Books wrote about it, Billboard wrote about it, said this is like one of the most magnificent. And lo and behold, I literally, I get my standing ovation, one of my standing ovations in the show, after I sing Beyond the Blue Horizon. It was just a great song. And then we took it into another area and recorded it that way, and with the help of course, Tony Romeo, who produced that with me.
Yeah, it's look for it, Lou Christie fans. Some of you may not think of Lou Christie with that particular kind of song, but Beyond the Blue Horizon is something special. Let me just interject here. You mentioned standing ovations. March 30th, I know you're going to be in Red Bank, New Jersey. And then I see that you're going to be part of our own Cousin Brucey's Rock and Roll Road Show. You're headlining it. It's going to be down in Boca, and they'll be taping that in a few weeks. And then at some point, on a future date to be announced, it will be live here or live pre-recorded on Sirius XM. So Lou Christie continues to tour and stay very busy. Tom, you had a thought.
Yeah, hi, Lou. Tom Frangione. Good to talk to you again.
Yeah, thank you. Nice to talk to you.
Wanted to pick up where my esteemed colleagues left off in the early 70s. You were at the concert for Bangladesh, correct?
I was. I was involved with Badfinger.
Yeah, that's where I'm going with this. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was traveling a lot to England, and pretty much I ended up living there for 3 years. I left America and then went over there, but I became friends with Badfinger before they really hit over here in America, and they were so, I guess, enamored with my management company, and they wanted me to introduce them to, people that helped me in America. And so I did. And, sometimes they stayed in my apartment here because I was moving over to England. And they went under this management company, which was like a strange, another story, which is probably about 5 chapters in a book. Yeah. But they came to America, and I was friends with them over there, and so I introduced them to the people that I was involved with, and they signed them, and then they became just the best. I mean, it was so great. I mean, Peter Ham, what writers they were just fantastic, and they just started taking off. And while they were staying in my apartment, sometime I was living in England, in London, because they had a house there too, and we used to, talk and go over to their place at night and things like that. My wife and I had just gotten married, so they were very much a part of my life. I mean, they were so talented, and I just knew they were going to make it, and lo and behold, they did.
Yeah. Now, with those trips to London, did they ever get you to cross paths over at Apple?
I was there, but I didn't. I wasn't looking for another record company. I was signed to a record company at that point, but there was always some shark who was taking care of me. In the record business, they were all paranoid that I would get too close to them. Because they were really writing their own things and involved with that, and I was sort of, leaving the States and living over there, and so my life was changing, and there was a lot of controversy around all of our situations, and and then of course, then I, one of the evenings we went to the Bangladesh concert with and with Peter Ham, and I think Eric Clapton was on that. That was a really spectacular night, and then I traveled on the road with George Harrison's sister, Louise Harrison. She would come on stage and talk about the Beatles, and things like that. And it was a very interesting time in my life, let's put it that way.
Well, Lou, I mean, so she would get up and tell stories about her brother George, and then you would perform?
Yeah, she would come out. She wouldn't sing, but she did a song. Remember there was a song called Ringo?
Yes.
It was like Ringo, and then she sort of rapped something about Ringo or the Beatles or something. I don't know, it wasn't rap at that time, but she spoke, and this song played Ringo. But she was on the tour, and she had I think a syndicated little radio show, and she would call into the radio stations while we were on tour and things like that. So and so I traveled with her for about a month on a caravan, one of these caravans that I did. But it was a very interesting time because, like I say, the Beatles changed the world. Whether I was flying over to go to Carnaby Street to buy my great outfits to wear on Top of the Pops in England or Ready, Steady, Go, and doing my concerts over there. I was literally working over there for 3 years, and it was wonderful. I mean, I did a few Royal Command performances, and with Dusty Springfield, we did a lot of TV shows together, and my life was just moved so quickly, that it's things I'll never forget in my life.
Well, Lou Christie, it's just been great because, for those of us like myself who just knew you through the records and now to hear these wonderful stories, and again, you continue to perform, and how do you hit those high notes? Because I know you do. How do you still do that?
I do. I don't think about it. I just do it. I just do it, and it's in the same key. I'm singing these damn songs in the same key. So I just got to do it, and just I have to turn 17 when I walk out on that stage,
Well,
and I love to see the audience do the same thing because that's the way they want to see life, and they remember these great times that we were all connected with, and everyone there in the studio, and along with the Beatles and along with the Dick Clarks and the Cousin Bruceys, and it was just a magnificent period in our lives.
Well, we thank you so much. Folks in and around Red Bank, New Jersey can look for you on March 30th. You will hear him with Cousin Brucey's Rock and Roll Road Show, which is going to be recorded in Boca Raton. And I imagine you have a website that people can go to stay in touch?
I do. Well, it's LouChristie.com, of course.
Okay.
And then, of course, I'm on Facebook. And that's just out of control. Then I have a website that is called It Should Have Been a Hit. And these are records that I've carried around in my head, songs that maybe Martha Reeves recorded and it never was released as a single, or it's someone else, a Chris Montez record, or a Supreme record, or maybe even one of mine. I don't just play my stuff; I play all different things, and I tell bit of stories and things like that, and then I play the record, and you can listen to it and vote if you want.
That's a great format.
So I can see at least 5 people in this room about to go on it. It should have been a hit.com. Is that what it is?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, exactly.
I think we could nominate a few for that.
Pardon me?
Each of us probably has a few nominees for that.
Exactly, and I'm always listening for people who say, "Oh, yeah," because I've carried these records around in my head, when they were 45s, and that was many years ago. But you come up with these songs, and you think, "Man, that should have been a hit,"
Great idea. As we say goodnight to Lou Christie, we always try and find, if we can, a Beatles cover. We looked high, we looked low, and we found If I Fell, right?
Yeah.
Oh,
so
great,
do you know exactly the origin of you recording the song, when perhaps, and where it eventually shows up?
Oh, sure. Well, I recorded it on the Lightning Strikes album. I did one side with a lot of my falsetto things, and then the other side, I just wanted to just sort of pick some great songs that I just liked, that I didn't write, and that was one of them. And it was really, people were kind of shocked because they just expected me to I my life through, But it was such a great song, and Charlie Colello, produced the record, and Artie Schreck did the chart on that, and it was if I Fell in Love, it was great.
So
and I love the song.
This comes out. Oh,
This came out in '66.
It came out in '66. You know, our producer, who I think you spoke to earlier today, his name is Adam Saltzman, and his grandpa, Buddy Saltzman, was the drummer on many of your records, right?
Yes, it was. Yes, he was. He played on many of my records. I did a whole album for Colpex, and that was he played on all of those records. Teenager in Love, Crying on My Knees, Big Time. I mean, loads of records that he played on. He was a great drummer.
All right. So
he was one of my first choices.
Adam, we're glad to find out you were telling us the truth.
Can never tell.
As we say goodnight, would you introduce this record for us?
Well, this is a Lennon-McCartney song, and I thought it was a wonderful, great melody, and it was very, very sweet, I think. And you don't use that word much anymore in the world, but it was a nice record. Here's "If I Fell."
Promise to be true and help me understand.
That was a treat to talk with Lou Christie. And not only does Lou do all the stuff we've been talking about, all the music and the websites, and he's got a show on Sirius on our 60s channel. I think the next batch, he said, is probably coming up next month. Everything from records about summer love and records about drive-ins, and he does an East Coast show, and so it's a kind of a specialty show.
It's kind of like a Northern Songs, but not quite.
But he's allowed to do all kinds
He
of
can
artists.
do everything. You got to be tethered here to the Beatles, folks.
All right, so thank you, Lou Christie. We will be listening and looking. It is the Beatles Fab Forum, and now for something completely different.